Right now, at this exact moment, there is a version of your financial life that you are capable of living, a version with more security, more freedom, more intentionality, more abundance. And the only thing standing between you and that version is not your income, not your education, not the economy, not your circumstances, not the family you were born into, or the opportunities you were or weren't given, but something far more intimate, far more invisible, and far more completely within your power to change than any of those external factors. And that thing is the specific, largely unconscious, psychologically complex relationship that your mind has developed with money over the course of your entire life. A relationship built from childhood observations you don't consciously remember, from emotional experiences you may have never examined, from cultural narratives you absorbed before you were old enough to question them, and from neurological patterns that now operate so automatically and so below the threshold of conscious awareness that most people experience them not as beliefs they hold, but as reality itself. Which is why today we are going to go completely inside the psychology of how your mind controls your money. Because understanding this relationship with genuine depth is not just financially useful, it is one of the most personally liberating things a human being can do, because the moment you see the psychological system that has been governing your financial behavior, you step outside it just enough to begin, for the first time, to govern it yourself. Let's start with the concept that financial psychologists call your money script, a term developed by financial therapist Ted Clontz and his colleagues to describe the collection of largely unconscious beliefs about money that form in childhood through observation, experience, and the emotional atmosphere of the household in which you grew up. These scripts are not abstract philosophies. They are deeply felt, neurologically encoded convictions about what money means, what having it or not having it says about you as a person, what you deserve financially, how money is obtained, how it is lost, and what relationship you are supposed to have with it based on the kind of person you are and the kind of family you come from. If you grew up in a household where money was a source of constant tension, where financial stress was a persistent emotional atmosphere, where scarcity was the dominant narrative, your money script may include convictions like, there is never enough, money causes conflict, wanting more than you have is greedy, people like us don't get wealthy, or financial security is something that happens to other kinds of people. If you grew up watching adults make money and lose it, make it and spend it immediately. Make it and feel guilty about having it. Those patterns are in your script too, encoded not as conscious beliefs, but as emotional templates that activate automatically when you face financial decisions and that steer your behavior toward outcomes that confirm and perpetuate the script regardless of what your conscious mind intends. The most disorienting and most important insight about money scripts is this: they are self-fulfilling. The brain, operating through the mechanism of confirmation bias and selective attention, filters your perception of financial reality to find evidence that confirms your existing money beliefs while systematically overlooking or discounting evidence that contradicts them. Which means that the person with a scarcity script will notice every financial setback and overlook every financial opportunity, will interpret ambiguous financial situations through the lens of loss rather than possibility, and will make behavioral choices that produce the scarcity outcomes the script predicted. Not because the script is accurate, but because the brain is a prediction machine that is extraordinarily competent at producing the reality it expects. Now, let's go into the neuroscience of financial decision making. Because the research in the field of neuroeconomics, which combines neuroscience, psychology, and economics to study how the brain actually makes financial choices, has produced findings that are simultaneously deeply surprising and immediately practically useful. The foundational discovery of neuroeconomics, established through the work of researchers including Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, and Antonio Damasio, is that financial decisions are not primarily rational calculations performed by a cool, analytical mind that weighs costs and benefits with objective precision. They are emotional events, processed primarily through the brain's affective systems, and rationality is applied not before the decision but after it, in the form of a post hoc justification of a conclusion that the emotional brain had already reached. Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis, developed through his research on patients with damage to the prefrontal cortex's connection to the emotional processing regions, demonstrated that people who are neurologically unable to incorporate emotional signals into their decision-making, who must rely on pure rational calculation without the guidance of emotional intuition, become catastrophically bad decision makers, unable to choose between options, unable to maintain consistent preferences, unable to navigate the complexity of real-world choices that require a synthesis of analysis and intuition that the intact emotional brain performs automatically. This means that emotions are not the enemy of good financial decision-making. They are an essential component of it. But it also means that specific emotional patterns, specific emotional histories, specific emotional vulnerabilities can systematically corrupt financial judgment in ways that are predictable, documentable, and correctable once they are identified. The financial consequences of unexamined emotional patterns are not small or occasional. They are continuous, compounding, and career-spanning, and they operate with the same quiet relentlessness as compound interest, except in reverse. Let's now examine the specific psychological biases that most predictably and most expensively corrupt financial thinking. Because these are not random errors, but systematic, neurologically grounded tendencies that operate consistently across people and cultures and whose effects on financial outcomes have been measured with precision. The first and most expensive of these biases is loss aversion. The finding by Kahneman and Tversky that the psychological pain of losing a given amount of money is approximately twice as intense as the psychological pleasure of gaining the equivalent amount. This asymmetry is not a minor quirk. It is a profound distortion of rational financial evaluation that produces a consistent and costly set of behavioral patterns. People hold losing investments far longer than they should because selling them crystallizes the loss and makes it psychologically real, while holding them preserves the possibility, however unlikely, that they will recover and spare the investor the emotional pain of confirmed failure. People avoid investments that carry any significant risk of loss even when the expected value of those investments is significantly positive, which means they consistently sacrifice long-term financial growth to avoid the short-term emotional discomfort of potential loss. And people experience the financial losses they do incur with a psychological intensity that is disproportionate to their actual financial significance, which creates ongoing emotional distress that impairs subsequent financial decision-making through the cognitive impairment of chronic stress. The second bias, and this one is perhaps the most universally experienced and the most consistently underappreciated in its financial consequences, is present bias, also known in the behavioral economics literature as hyperbolic discounting, which is the brain's tendency to dramatically overvalue rewards available in the immediate present relative to rewards available in the near future, and to overvalue near future rewards relative to those available in the more distant future. The brain does not discount future rewards at a consistent, rational rate. It discounts them hyperbolically, meaning that the subjective value of a reward drops precipitously as soon as any delay is introduced, and then decreases much more slowly as the delay extends further. This produces the specific and familiar pattern in which the bonus that you fully intended to invest feels, in the moment of receiving it, like something that desperately needs to be spent on something immediately satisfying, even though the version of you that made the investment intention was thinking rationally about the same money and reached a completely different conclusion. The money hasn't changed. The rational analysis hasn't changed. What has changed is that the money is now present and immediate, and the brain's limbic reward system has evaluated it with an emotional intensity that the prefrontal cortex's future-oriented planning cannot match in real time. The third bias, and this one has costs that most people never fully calculate, is the Diderot Effect, named after the 18th century French philosopher Denis Diderot, who wrote an essay describing how the acquisition of a single beautiful scarlet dressing gown led him into a cascade of purchases to update his entire life to match the new acquisition's standard of quality. The Diderot effect is the psychological tendency for one acquisition to create a new reference point that makes existing possessions feel inadequate, triggering a spiral of further spending to bring the rest of one's material life into alignment with the new standard. This is the psychological mechanism behind lifestyle inflation. Why a raise leads to a better car, leads to a nicer apartment, leads to more expensive clothes, leads to more expensive social environments whose costs require still more income. And understanding it as a psychological mechanism rather than a series of reasonable individual decisions reveals the extent to which what feels like free choice is actually the behavioral expression of a neurological process that the conscious mind experiences as preference, but is actually responding to a social comparison and status calibration system that evolution built into the human brain long before money existed. Now, let's talk about the psychology of financial avoidance, because this is the pattern that most directly and most concretely keeps people from building wealth, and it is driven not by ignorance or indifference, but by a specific and deeply human psychological mechanism that makes looking at financial reality feel threatening in ways that trigger the same avoidance response that the brain uses to protect itself from physical danger. The ostrich effect, named for the popular image of an ostrich burying its head in the sand to avoid seeing a threat, is the documented tendency to actively avoid information that might be negative or threatening to one's sense of financial security or financial self-concept. People check their investment accounts less frequently during market downturns. They open bank statements with less attention when they know they have been overspending. They avoid calculating their net worth when they suspect the number will be uncomfortable. They skip the fine print on financial products whose costs they don't want to confront. And each of these avoidances, while providing momentary emotional relief from the discomfort of financial reality, prevents the precise, accurate understanding of financial position that is the prerequisite for any improvement in that position, which means the avoidance pattern is directly and causally connected to the ongoing deterioration of the financial situation it is designed to avoid thinking about. The research on financial avoidance consistently shows that the vague, diffuse, low-level financial anxiety of not knowing is psychologically more damaging and practically more costly over time than the sharp, specific, actionable discomfort of knowing precisely where you stand. Because precise knowledge, however uncomfortable, is the only information that the brain can use to generate a plan, and a plan, however imperfect, is the only thing that converts financial anxiety from a chronic background condition into a specific, solvable problem with a specific, actionable solution. Let's now look at the deepest layer of the mind-money relationship. The layer that sits beneath the biases, beneath the scripts, beneath the avoidance patterns, and that governs all of them from below, which is the financial self-concept, the deeply held psychological belief about what you deserve financially, what is possible for someone like you, and what your relationship with abundance is supposed to look like based on the identity you carry about who you fundamentally are. T. Harv Eker's concept of the financial thermostat describes this with an accuracy that behavioral research consistently validates. Every person has an internal financial set point, a level of wealth that feels psychologically normal, safe, and deserved, and the brain unconsciously works to maintain wealth at that set point by producing behavioral choices that return financial reality to its psychological home temperature, regardless of what the conscious mind intends or what external circumstances make possible. This is why sudden wealth, lottery winnings, inheritance, unexpected financial windfalls, statistically returns to the recipient's prior financial state within a few years in the majority of documented cases. This is why many people who receive significant raises find that their lifestyle expands to consume the entire increase within months, leaving their net savings position essentially unchanged. And this is why some people repeatedly reach a specific level of income or business revenue and unconsciously stop pushing, introduce self-sabotaging behaviors, or make decisions that inexplicably undermine their continued financial growth. Because at a deep psychological level, more than their thermostat setting feels undeserved, unstable, or threatening to a self-concept that was formed long before they had any conscious choice in the matter. Raising the financial thermostat is not a matter of positive thinking or affirmations. It is a matter of deliberate identity work, of examining where the current set point came from, of accumulating evidence through small financial wins that a higher level of financial well-being is consistent with who you are, of surrounding yourself with people for whom a higher financial reality is normal and therefore neurologically safe through the mechanism of social comparison and mirror neuron activation, and of building the experiential track record of sound financial decision-making that gives the brain genuine evidence rather than hopeful assertion that a different financial identity is accurate and sustainable. And this brings us to the most important and most practically actionable truth that this entire video has been building toward. The truth that contains within it the seed of every financial transformation that has ever occurred in the history of human economic behavior. Your mind controls your money not because you are a passive victim of your own psychology, but because your psychology is operating on programming that was installed before you were old enough to evaluate it, running scripts that were written by other people's experiences and other people's fears and other people's limited understanding, of what was financially possible and producing financial outcomes that are perfectly consistent with that programming, regardless of how inconsistent they are with your conscious intentions and genuine potential. But programming, unlike genetics, can be rewritten. Scripts, unlike destiny, can be examined and replaced. Biases, once named and understood, can be corrected for with specific cognitive tools that behavioral science has now documented with sufficient precision to make them genuinely usable by any person with the willingness to apply them. And the financial self-concept, the thermostat that has been governing your financial behavior from below the level of conscious awareness, can be gradually, imperfectly, but genuinely and permanently raised through the accumulation of new evidence, new experiences, new associations, and new behavioral patterns that tell your brain, through the only language it ultimately accepts, which is the language of repeated lived experience, that a different and more abundant financial reality is not just something you want, but something you are, something you are becoming, something that is already emerging in the specific daily financial choices you are making differently today than you made them yesterday, and that those choices, compounded across weeks and months and years with the same patient inevitability that compound interest compounds money, will produce a financial life that is not the life your old programming designed for you, but the life your genuine, examined, deliberately reconstructed relationship with money is now, finally, building. Subscribe for more mind secrets.